Pope Benedict said that conversion is about making more room for God in our lives and exiting the illusion of self-sufficiency. In other words, emptying ourself of self and depending more on God. These principles and more are on display in St. Paul's great conversion story, where we pick up on the tail end of it in our first reading. First, God can flip our passions for his purposes. Paul was passionate about stomping out Christianity. As a rigorous student of Judaism, he saw Christianity as a heresy or error to the faith. Jesus was passionate about making disciples of the Gentiles, and he needed a new recruit. So conversion is a matter of God, changing the trajectory of our passions. Think of our pursuits and passions as a spacecraft headed in the wrong direction. To change the trajectory of a spacecraft, we often utilize a method called the gravitational slingshot. It involves slingshotting a spacecraft around a much bigger object that has gravity, such as a moon or planet, and redirecting it without losing any energy. Before he was Paul, Saul's trajectory was breathing murderous threats and pursuing Christians to arrest them. He was even present at the first martyrdom of St. Stephen. Then Paul's life crossed the path of Jesus, this immovable rock, and slingshotted him to pursue making disciples instead. God has a much harder time making us passionate about religion than he does changing our trajectory to be in the correct direction. Second, we must accept humility when it comes our way. And yes, even humiliation can lead to the virtue of humility. Paul was a force to be reckoned with when he was on his way to Damascus to arrest Christians. God struck Paul flat to the ground and blinded him with a bright light. Humiliations come our way in various forms and break us free from what Pope Benedict called the illusion of self-sufficiency. Perhaps we lose our position at work that we thought was so valuable, or we make an error in sports that costs the game, or our health declines. In all of these, our ego has been deflated, and for the better. This illusion that we are independent, and everything would fall apart without us, is gone, and now we have to rely on the strength of God alone. Third, God sends little people who are big encouragers into our life. Paul, temporarily blinded, was led by hand by a wimpy little man named Ananias. Ananias encouraged Paul to cooperate with the transformation that God was doing, and eventually baptized Paul. Afterward, Paul was aided by Barnabas, who introduced him to the apostles in Jerusalem, and was instrumental on his missionary journeys. Paul, the great evangelizer, depended on the little people during and after his conversion. Fourth, true conversion requires a sustained prayer life. In Paul's letter to the Galatians, we learn that before he met the apostles in Jerusalem, he went on a 3-year retreat to Arabia, where he was alone with Jesus in prayer. In our gospel, Jesus spells out the importance of prayer. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. In other words, apart from Christ, we wither and die. To remain in Jesus means that we must abide or dwell with Jesus in prayer and in the sacraments regularly to have life. If Paul had not prayed for this extended period and discerned his new vocation, his missionary journeys would have ended before they started. Lastly, evangelizers are not always welcomed, especially converts. Think of great converts to Catholicism, such as St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, whose family and friends abandoned her after leaving the Episcopal Church. She told a friend that her life would have been easier if she had lived in a cave or a desert. But she continued, "God has given me a great deal to do, and I hope always to prefer His will to every wish of my own." Even the scholar and cardinal, Blessed John Henry Newman, after his conversion, remarked how the Episcopal Church hated him and the Catholic Church didn't trust him. He was in good company, though. For the people Paul initially preached to were leery, and after meeting with the apostles in Jerusalem, they put him on a boat to go home and not start his missionary journeys for the next 10 years. Conversion is not easy, but is necessary for our salvation and for the salvation of the world. Conversion is about becoming more like the one who loved us into existence. For St. Athanasius said, Jesus became what we are, that he might make us what he is.